We always talked about chemical imbalance. That's been the party line for decades. And there may be some of that, of course, because we are treating brain chemistry, but we don't really have proof necessarily for it. You got to do something every day, do something you love. And it stimulates those circuits, like taking them to the gym, form good habits and become their slave.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to a new episode of Redesign Your Life Today. Redesign Your Life Today is the show where you realize that transformation is possible at any moment in your life. The idea is for you to get inspirations and to know that you can do that. And today, I've got a very special guest. I'm really very honored to have Dr. David Kent with us. David is a board certified psychiatrist with over 35 years of clinical experience. He's the founder of the New Me TMS clinics, and he's a pioneer in advanced brain-based treatments for depression, bringing together cutting-edge neuroscience, real human stories, and a deeply compassionate vision for recovery. So, David, a very warm welcome to the show. And this was a very brief introduction, but I would like you to introduce you a little further. Who is David, and why is he doing what he's doing today?
Thank you very much for having me on your show, and I'm excited to kind of talk in general about things. I'm a board certified psychiatrist, but behind the scenes, I'm a father of five, have a large family I've raised. I'm just a human being like everybody else navigating through life. The reason I'm in the field I'm in was a large part when I was going through medical school at the University of Iowa. You rotate through the different specialties. So I wrote, about halfway through the year, I rotated through psychiatry, and it was not even on my radar. I didn't even think that was something I didn't know anything about it really. And I ran into a really enthusiastic senior resident who said it was very effective and one of the more successful specialties in medicine. And that really almost puzzled me a little bit. And the more I looked into it, the more I felt he was probably right. And I just made a decision. This is what I wanted to do for the rest of my life. And now I look back on it, it was a pivotal moment. It was the best decision I've ever made. It's a perfect fit for me. It's a combination of being able to treat people, see people every day, all day, which is something, I'm a people person. So that was super important for me. But also there was still science involved. I still got to be a doctor. I still got to practice what I was learning. There was an interesting story because back in the 1980s in the United States, psychiatry was mostly psychoanalytic psychotherapy coming out of a long Freudian era of psychiatry where it wasn't biologically based. It was based more on your family of origin. So, but my department I was at University of Iowa was one of the few biologically based programs. And it was actually the best one in the United States at the time, in my opinion, had the best researchers, the best faculty, the best experience. So I saw a wide variety of conditions. But the researchers weren't just researchers, they were clinicians. They saw real humans, they saw real patients. And so they had a real good balance there. So I felt extremely lucky to be able to kind of just happen to be there at the right place at the right time. You hear those kind of stories all the time. But it also comes down to making the right decisions. So that's how I got into it. And then psychiatry is a 4-year training after medical school. So it's a subspecialty of medicine. And then after that, I moved to Idaho, where I live now, and I've been here practicing for 35 years, raising my family, going through life like everybody else, and developing my skills. And so that's kind of how I've come to where I am today. And I tell people I've seen just about every kind of human you can possibly come across. So I have a really vast knowledge of human nature and human beings and the struggles that they go through. I've worked in every setting. I've worked in outpatient, inpatient. I've even worked in the penitentiary for a while. I've worked at state hospitals where you see really sick, institutionalized patients. So there's really nothing I haven't come across. Nothing really surprises me anymore. So that's a little bit of my background. I'm still enthusiastic to this day about practicing psychiatry. I still love it. I still feel lucky. I have to pinch myself that I'm still doing this, and I really enjoy it. I feel like my skills are right now at the best they've ever been, and I feel like I've been on this long journey of self-discovery and learning about myself and how can I be better and what else can I use in my arsenal to treat these very challenging illnesses that present themselves. So that's a bit of a long little intro, but that's kind of how it all came to be.
Well, I have to say it's a beautiful intro, and do you know what stands out when we listen to you, David, is your passion and your enthusiasm and this sense of purpose. And you had it from a very kind of early age. How important is it? I mean, actually, even when you deal with your patients, to perhaps help them awaken this sense of purpose in terms of really alive, being alive.
I appreciate that. I always felt like patients needed hope because a lot of times they come to me without hope. And so they need to know that there's things available that can help them, not just words, but things that can actually provide results. So results provide hope, and that's super important because a lack of hope is a bad place to be.
Wow, absolutely. And David, if I'm correct, you often describe mental illness as like the brain on tilt. What does this metaphor reveal? The traditional
Yeah,
label
that's
failed
based on
brain.
my book title. People ask me that all the time. Why did I use that? Well, in part, I did it as in jest a little bit because I'm a long-term poker player, and when you play poker, you try to get your opponent quote on tilt, which means you get them to be more emotional or angry or upset or frustrated, and then when they get that way, they don't make as good of decisions, and then you can beat your opponent. So tilt could mean that, where you get, someone's off. It basically means people are off balance. And that's what happens with mental illness. They're off their game, they're off balance. They're not straight up and down. They're on an angle almost, they're on tilt. So this name came to me in the middle of the night for my book title. I was struggling with all these names to call my book, the Psychiatrist Guide to Mental Illness, pretty boring titles. And then at 3:30 in the morning, I woke up and said, "Why me? The brain on tilt." Okay, that's my title. That's my book, and that's kind of how I came up with it.
Wow. I mean, such a beautiful story. See, following your intuition as well, I guess it's quite important. And so, David, you said you've been now working for over like 35 years. And after all that time, what would you say has the most profoundly changed in your understanding of depression and severe mental illness?
Well, let's break that down. Depression is its own entity. Well, they're all related, but depression is your kind of bread and butter as a psychiatrist because that's what you see the most of,
Mhm.
and it can be sometimes the most challenging. So I'm a big believer in giving patients what I call a full informed consent. That means when someone's new to me, comes to me in my practice, or I see them in the hospital, I say, okay, I'm going to give you all your options for treating this. I'm not just going to steer you in one direction, but I want you to be part of this. So I'll talk about medications. And medications are usually the first line of defense for treating depression, but they have a larger failure rate than people like to admit. And the more they fail, the more they're likely to fail. And so you have to start to think about other options. And so there's always electroconvulsive therapy, or ECT, which has been around forever, but it has a stigma to it. It's more invasive. Um, and so it's a tougher sell. And usually you reserve that for much later when everything else has failed. But that brings me straight over to TMS, which stands for transcranial magnetic stimulation. That has been the most exciting new tool in my arsenal in the last 11 years. It's been around a little bit longer than that, but I've been using it for 11 years, and it transformed the way I approached brain science and how I understood brain science. My first international meeting on TMS was in Barcelona, Spain in 2017 when I was just really getting going with my TMS practice, and I met world experts. There was 1,000 researchers at that meeting from all over the world, and I was really kind of blown away how much we already knew about brain stimulation and brain science, and just wasn't knowledge to me at that time until I went to these meetings and became really understanding. And the big pivot was, we always talked about chemical imbalance, chemical imbalance, chemical imbalance. That's been the party line for decades. And there may be some of that, of course, because we are treating brain chemistry, but we don't really have proof necessarily for it, for at least depression. No one's really been able to show it. Now, what we're starting to understand is that the brain has circuits, and there's at least 17 unique circuits in the brain. The way TMS works is it uses an electromagnetic device and it targets individual circuits and it stimulates those circuits, like taking them to the gym. And over time, those circuits become strong, so much so that there's neuroplasticity involved. And sometimes the treatment can last for months or years, and people can become med-free. And that's the exciting part of TMS. Plus, there's no long-term side effects. So it's the safest treatment, the most effective treatment, and the most durable treatment in use today. So I think that's the most exciting development in the last 10 years or so is my understanding and practice of TMS, but I still do everything else. I do medicines and all that. You mentioned bipolar disorder. Bipolar disorder is another mood disorder. It's classified as such, where you see the highs and the lows. Sometimes, or a lot of times, it can be easily missed because sometimes the highs aren't euphoria like we standardly think about it. Sometimes it's more of an angry, irritable, agitated type high. They have the energy, they have the racing thoughts, but they're more irritable and short-tempered. And so a lot of people miss that because, well, that's not bipolar, but yeah, it still is. And you don't want to miss something like that because if you use just antidepressants with someone who's bipolar, it just makes it worse. So I'm a big proponent of making the right diagnosis at the very onset. Otherwise, you go down a wrong path and you can do more harm than you do good. So I know that you're a life coach, and that's fantastic. I'm more of the trying to get the brain science right. And even with psychotherapy, if you don't get the brain science right, then the psychotherapy doesn't work very well because they're not in a place to be able to handle and manage and do and make decisions because they're so off their game. So I come in and I get them balanced and stable, and then they can start to really make progress on all the other areas of their life that they need to work on, right? We're all flawed as human beings. We all are on this long journey of life trying to figure it out. And I always tell people they don't teach us in school about relationships. Our parents rarely teach us about that. They're coming out of some level of maybe dysfunction or trouble in their childhood. So it doesn't usually get passed on. We have to go after that information. We have to go seek it out, and we have to be willing to change. So once we stabilize some of these mental illnesses, then you can hopefully make better decisions. You can hopefully work on yourself and maybe lifestyle changes, exercise properly, eating properly, but also decision making. And I tell people decisions matter. You can make one decision, it's like a fork in the road. It can take you in a really great direction, or it could take you in a really, really bad direction. So, and that's the journey we're all on, right? We're always trying to make the right decision. But when you're mentally ill or off in your game, you tend to make the wrong decisions. You
Mhm.
tend to go down the wrong path. So if someone's depressed, for instance, and they're thinking about maybe getting married or maybe make decisions or not getting married, I say, let's get you out of the depression so you can think clearly. And then the decision you make is probably the right one. But if you make a decision when you're not thinking clearly, you'll probably later regret it. So those are the type of things that I think about.
Wow. Again, this is quite amazing. And several things came to mind, David. First, the question of alignment with oneself. So how important is it? Because I mean, obviously, as a mental fitness coach, for me, the idea is that helping people to really understand who they are, what their purpose is, and because very often this imbalance I can see in people is that they are misaligned. They do things which it's not what they want to do; it's others. And so, how do we can we help people getting closer to really being themselves, and how effective it in helping with mental diseases?
That's a good point. I think a lot of humans are reactionary rather than with a purpose and a plan. And so the people that sit down and try to figure out who they are and how they tick and how they think and how they feel, that's the human being that can go on and have a more fulfilling life. Obviously, for the mental illness side of things, that they have to have other things stabilized before they can even do that. But I think it's important for people to live with purpose and figure out who they are. I had to do that in medical school. I sat down with myself and I said, okay, I've got a big life decision coming up here because what I choose to go into matters. It'll matter to my happiness. It'll matter to my family life. It'll matter to my own purpose and how I feel and how much I enjoy it. So I sat down and analyzed myself. I said, what makes me tick? And I said, well, first of all, I like people. I like to be around people. I like to help people. I like that. So I don't want to be in a field because I was considering radiology and anesthesiology, and those aren't being really around people. Either they're asleep or you're just looking at some film. And my parents were both photographers. My grandfather was a pretty famous photographer, so I grew up around film. And so there was like this, oh, maybe I should do that because of my family. But then I got to thinking I'd be stuck in a room looking at film all day long. I wouldn't be meeting with patients. I wouldn't be talking with anybody hardly. I'd probably go crazy. So I had to analyze myself, right? It's kind of what you're talking about. You got to understand yourself, and then you can make hopefully good decisions that you can live with. The very best advice I ever got, one of the reasons I went into medical school in the first place was when I was in high school at age 16, my family happened to know a world famous cardiac or heart surgeon. He was at the University of Iowa. He specialized in young preemies and children as a heart surgeon. He actually trained under DeBakey, which is the most famous heart surgeon of all time. And he would go to Russia and China, and they would want him to come to demonstrate his techniques. That's how famous he was. But he's good friends of our family. I just knew him as Don. And so when I was in high school, he invited me to come in and watch him do open heart surgery. I actually scrubbed in, got in the gown, scrubbed in, gloves, everything. I stood by the anesthesiologist and looked over the skirt, and I looked straight down into the chest while he did open heart surgery. On two occasions I did. The first time I almost fainted because it was like, whoa, this is almost too much. But then I got my act together, and then it was fascinating from that point on. And that was what turned me over to going into medicine. I said, there's something about medicine that's fascinating to me. I got to go into it. But I asked him one day, I said, Don, how did you do going through cardiovascular surgery? Because that track is 4 years of college, 4 years of medical school, 5 years of general surgery, and 7 years of cardiovascular surgery. It's forever. And the first thing out of my mouth was, David, you got to do something every day. Do something you love.
Wow.
And
So,
so that's been my mantra my whole life is I told that to my children. You got to do something every day. Do something you love. Because if I steer them in a direction where it's practical, like you be a doctor too, or you be a lawyer, or you do that because it makes good money, they could be terribly miserable. And I would have steered them that direction. I would have been responsible for that. And I don't want that. I said, you've got to follow your heart. And so that's always been my mantra.
well, thank you so much for sharing this. I have to say, I resonate fully with you because again, it's about helping people discovering or rediscovering what they really love doing. And it's never too late to change because life is not easy anyway, but if you things you don't enjoy doing, I mean, it really becomes really painful. And David, I'd like to come back on what you said a little before. I mean, obviously, neuroscience has evolved a lot, and people talk about neuroplasticity. I mean, and about the idea of reconnected neurons into clusters and basically building new habits in your life. How is that applied, for instance, in treatments of mental health illness and conditions?
Well, in the past, we wouldn't have had this conversation like this. Neuroplasticity wasn't really in the conversation about treating depression or bipolar. But with the advent of TMS, and TMS is the most well-studied treatment of all time. People
Hmm.
don't realize it. It's been studied for decades. There's maybe well over 100,000 papers worldwide and many, many books about it. It's hard science too. It's not this pseudoscience thing. They've been really diving down because actually TMS was discovered in London by Anthony Barker. He was a PhD physicist. Actually, he was a medical physicist, which I didn't even know was a thing. He discovered that in London. And then he was partnered with a neuropsychiatrist from South Carolina named Mark George, who heard about it, and they pioneered the whole technology. Mark has since written 6 or 7 books and hundreds of scholarly peer-reviewed articles. He's considered one of the fathers of TMS. But it all started in London, and it started with a tinkerer. Had someone who was interested, fascinated, had a question. He wanted to know if he could go through the skull and stimulate the brain. So he
Mm-hmm.
had a Michael Faraday electromagnetic coil, and he put it on someone's head, and he got the right hand to twitch because he was over the motor strip. That was the whole beginning of this new era of brain science. From there on out, we had to figure out, well, we see that this has this effect, but where can it work? Why does it work? What does it do actually? And TMS is one of the first things we could actually demonstrate neuroplasticity. Well, how did we do that? Well, we did it 2 different ways. We used MRIs to do brain imaging of the brain. And
Mm-hmm.
the limbic system is one of the most important regions of the brain when it comes to psychiatry and neurology. It's the emotion center as well as memories housed there. And scientists were able to demonstrate in successful TMS cases where people got better, that the amygdala, which is a small, like pea-sized structure bilateral on both sides of the brain, actually got bigger in successful cases. So it enlarged, and they could actually statistically show that. So it was not in doubt. What was in doubt was, how did that happen? What's actually going on? Why is it getting bigger? We've always talked neurochemistry, not enlargement of a structure. So scientists took neurons in a dish in a lab, live neurons, and they gave those neurons TMS. And they looked in the microscope before and after, and the number
Mm-hmm.
of connections between the cell bodies increased in number. So that demonstrated neuroplasticity. So that's now thought to be the mechanism of action of TMS, is that neuroplasticity. And you get neuroplasticity from other ways too. I think we're starting to learn some lifestyle habits and things we do can improve certain pathways in the brain and possibly cause neuroplasticity. So it's not just external stimulation. And there's other ways that can happen. Um, it comes into play a lot. Neuroplasticity was a thing when it came to strokes. It was always a word used when strokes that, can the brain reroute itself? Can it kind of work around the damaged area of the brain? And now there's some science that suggests that some of that is possible. Some is possible. That's why someone who gets a stroke, if it's not too severe, sometimes they make a partial or full recovery because the brain has that neuroplasticity, do a workaround essentially. So that's the exciting thing that's really been developing in the last few decades, is that whole concept. And I never had that concept until more recently. So it's been exciting for me.
Well, thank you very much for sharing. And I said in coaching, it's very important as well, because obviously it's about helping people changing habits, getting new habits. And it's not, you cannot eliminate a habit, you can replace it by an empowering habit. And it's really by repetition, by being intentional with your goals, by doing it every day, whatever it takes, that things are coming. It's gradual, but afterwards you realize that the old habits has gone because you've replaced something. So, and it's, it could be learn a new language, do anything, and this is quite, I find it absolutely fascinating.
Well, when I was 16, when I saw this open heart surgery, I made a decision I wanted to be a doctor. So I had to kind of really buckle down and do well in school and all sorts of things. Started reading all these self-help books, and one of the books I read was called The Greatest Salesman by Og Mandino. It's kind of an
Mhm.
old little gem, but it had one chapter in there that stuck with me my whole life. And every chapter had this little saying that you should apply in your life. And this one chapter was about habits, like you were talking about. And there, the final takeaway in that chapter was, form good habits and become their slave. Because we are a slave to habits, whether we like it or not. Whatever habits we have, we're a slave to them. So why not form good ones? Why do they have to be all bad ones? And so that's been one of my life mantras, is form good habits and become their slave. And then you kind of have no choice, because they're just habits. And so But it's repetition, right? Like you're saying, it doesn't happen overnight. You can't just make the decision. You've got to actually repeat it over and over again to the point where you can't help yourself anymore. And that's just the way you are.
Absolutely, absolutely. So powerful. And obviously, what we don't always realize if we've not kind of studied it, that most of the habits we repeat in life, we kind of acquire them very early, in the first 7 years of our lives, where we get everything in without filter, mainly from our parents, from our environment, from school, from church, etc. And this is our programming. So it's not who we are, it's really what we become. So afterwards, it's about how do we become aware of these habits, particularly if they don't serve us, and how can we empower ourselves to reframe or to rewire our subconscious mind.
That's a good point because childhood is so powerful. They are who we are, but that doesn't mean they have to define us because it really begins with becoming self-aware. And that's taken me years to figure that out. I always said I had this perfect idyllic childhood, and there's a lot of things that were great about it. But there were a lot of things that weren't great about it that I didn't realize till I was an adult and in relationships and all those sorts of things that I started to realize that we didn't have the emotional tools growing up. We didn't have the hugging and I love you and all those things that kind of matter when you get to be an adult and you have relationships because those are some of the critical pieces. So I had to become self-aware that this is a problem. I had to go get tools to try to change. Am I perfect now? No. But at least I have an understanding of what the problem is and I'm taking ownership of it. So I think childhood is super powerful. And we come through a lot of systems, try to indoctrinate why children because they're so impressionable and it's so long lasting. So big time regimes, the dictatorial regimes, that's their primary target is children. Try to indoctrinate them to believe and think a certain way to the point where it's really hard to overcome that. But parents can be guilty as well, indoctrinating us to a certain way that's they think is the only way. Or, I hate to say it, but religious stuff can do that too. So you have to kind of be careful. Um, it's okay to have a belief system, but you have to understand why you have it and make sure it's by volition, by choice, not because you somehow were indoctrinated into it and make sure that that's what you want to do with your life and that's who you are. But indoctrination is, like you said, incredibly powerful. So it's good to recognize it because they're not going to undo it in school. They're not going to undo it through some sort of osmotic process. You have to understand it, you got to recognize it, and then you got to get tools to kind of say, okay, I want to be a little different. That's not producing happiness for me.
Yeah. I mean, so powerful. And see, there's this expression which we use. I mean, it's about childhood trauma, which we and it's about doing the shadow work or the inner work. And to be, how does this resonate with you, David? I'm talking particularly of people who really experienced really hard things and they need to come to term with that in order to change.
Yeah, if there's trauma involved, it's a whole different animal. It's harder, but not impossible. Nothing's impossible, but it's harder because the brain is very powerful, and you have to understand the brain is an organ. And just like there's the kidney and there's a liver and there's pancreas and all these organs, and when those things are not doing well, they affect us, and we can't just outthink it. And so the brain is no different, except it's just more complex. It doesn't mean you can't overcome it, but it takes certain kinds of therapy, certain kinds of approach, a lot of patience, some setbacks along the way, but persistence and a goal in mind of what you want to be, who you want to be, and sort of lay back aside that prior self which was damaged. So it's definitely not easy, but doable, definitely. There is techniques available. It always starts with insight. It always starts with a willingness to change, a willingness to move forward and try to find our better new self and turn the page, so to speak, if we can. Easier said than done, but it is doable for sure.
Well, again, thank you so much for sharing with us, David. And if we could leave our viewers and listeners with like three tips, they could take today? Imagine that they feel some depressed or not well, or they have somebody in their family you involved. What would you say it would be?
Well, if it's persistent, where it goes on for weeks or months or years, they have to go see a qualified, competent professional who can that maybe word of mouth is really got a good reputation, and they hopefully will get them the right treatment that they need. That's job one. There's a lot of stigma around mental illness. It's like a weakness or a flaw or something, and people feel bad. Set all that aside. It's just a brain disorder. That's all. It's not your fault. It's not anyone's fault. Just like if you had diabetes, it's not your fault. You don't need to be ashamed. So it's okay to go get help. And hopefully your family will support you, but sometimes they also contribute to the stigma by either saying shameful things or judgmental things, but you got to look past that. And my book, Why Me, the Brain on Tilt, which we've referenced in this podcast, really addresses all of that, addresses each of these conditions. It talks about stigma, talks about how we should talk with each other, what kind of words should we use, how can we be helpful rather than harmful, because everything matters when what we say out of our mouth. Everything matters. And so the book is really helpful. It's a life work, this book. I've wanted to write this for a long time. I finally just said, I didn't think I could do it. And I finally broke down and did it. And I'm really happy with how it turned out. I've had really, really good feedback on it from my patients. And I can now hand them something and say, read this, and I think this is going to help you. And that's kind of what I've done.
Wow. I mean, it's amazing. And if I'm correct, your book is really more story driven rather than just purely academic. So, David, why are stories so important in healing and in understanding mental illness?
Well, large part because we resonate with stories. All humans resonate with stories because we connect to it. Emotion is the key thing. We have to emotionally connect something in order to want to change. Right? We see a powerful movie or we read a powerful book. It has an effect on us. Those effects cause change. And so I didn't want to just write this sterile, factual book, a textbook. Those are already out there, and no one's going to read them. I wanted to read a book that someone wouldn't want to put down because they're resonating with it. And that's what I found. I have this book sitting in a psychiatric hospital, and every day patients come up to me and say how much it changed and affected them. And it's because of the stories. They resonate with those stories, and then they see the hope involved with those stories. So I wanted to write a book that was readable, and I also didn't want to use jargon or words that were speaking over people. And I really wrote it for everyone. Everyone should read it because we're all affected by mental illness in some fashion, either ourselves, our families, our friends, or colleagues. We're surrounded by it. It's so common. And I wanted everybody to actually understand it because there's just too much that people don't understand. There's so many gaps in our knowledge.
Well, this is really amazing. And I have to say that today you didn't just give us information, but you gave us understanding, compassion, and hope. And you're reminding each of us that behind diagnosis, there is a human story, and that recovery is not only possible, but evolving through both science and connection. So thank you so much. And when people want to connect with you, because I'm sure a lot of people here, viewers, will love to do that, what's the best way?
Well, the best way is you can post it on your site. It's my website for my book. It's called davidkentauthor.com.
Okay.
And that has a bio about me, something about the book. At the bottom, there's an email, so you can always email me and I'd respond. But also, there's all the podcasts I'm on. This is my fourth one in a week. I'll be on there, and I've got two more today. So I'll have plenty of podcasts like yours, of course. And I have that. I have a blog on there that talks about my book. I'll constantly put stuff on that site for people to connect to. I really want people who struggle. I want them to have a place they can go, a safe place they can go and figure things out. But the book is a good starting place because it really has great information in a good way. So if we go to that website, I think that's where it all starts. That's how you get the book as well. And I used a narrator out of Belfast for the book, and he's amazing. So I have an audio version, I have a Kindle version, and I have a paperback. And I've done a Kindle. I have some people who've gotten my book in the UK, so it's starting to get there. starting to get some listenership and viewership there and readership. So I'm excited. I'm a Kent, so I have a deep English roots that go way back. John Kent was the first Kent to come over from England, and that's my direct line. So I have a direct line to England.
Well, again, it's amazing. So I encourage everybody to get hold of Dr. Kent's book and audio there because it's going to, it's will be amazing. And to thanks a lot for sharing your wisdom and passion for what you do because it's contagious. And I'm sure everybody will feel that. And to our listeners, if this conversation touched you, please share it with someone who needs to replace fear with understanding that there's hope and change is possible. And please subscribe to my channel if you liked it. Thank you very much and see you all at the next episode. Bye bye.